Shabbat Shalom. Our parasha today, Lecha, literally means go forth. This is the first of 3 parashot, Lecha, Ve'ira, and Chayasera, which narrate the life and the times of our father, Avraham. These Torah readings recount the days of our great patriarch, the one from whom our people and our nation of Israel were created by Hashem. His name was originally Avram, which means exalted father. It was changed by God to Avraham, the father of a multitude, when God created the covenant with Avraham and his descendants forever. This family originated in the city of Ur in the Chaldees in southern Mesopotamia. The city is located near the Euphrates River, about 150 miles southeast of Babylon. Today, this is southern Iraq, about 100 miles northwest of the Kuwait border. When we first meet Avraham, his family is already outward bound. They have moved with his father Terah to Haran, which stood on the river Lekh, about 600 miles northwest of Ur. So quite a long trip, actually. This is on the caravan route between the east and the west, so a significant area, despite the fact that it doesn't have the impact of a city like Ur. As this week's parsha unfolds, God speaks to Avram, who was already 75 years old, and he said, Lecha. Just that. He directed Avraham to go forth. Not a suggestion, a command. A command from a God that Avraham already knew. He was told to leave his native land and also his father's home. He and his brother had been part of the community, the tribe, if you like. And he was told to leave this behind him and go to a land that God would show him. So not even a specific place. But some people might ask, why did God choose someone of this sort of age? Someone who might be considered to be already past his prime. But how many of us at any age would leave behind everything familiar and go to an unknown destination at the direction of someone unseen? Family meant everything to those living in the time of Avraham, as it does even today to many people. And it was most unusual to move away from the safety and the security of the extended family, or to choose to live hundreds of miles away. And of course, in this case, Avram didn't even know how far away. But Hashem, who was already known to Avram, certainly not a new acquaintance, promised to bless him and to make of him a great nation on his own and in agreement with his new name. God promised Abraham that despite his age, he would produce an heir with his elderly wife, Sarai. So why did God choose someone at such a time of life? Why not when he and his wife were young? Avram was told that this promised son would be a child of his body and of Sarai's. This son would inherit not only what belonged to Abraham then, but also the unique covenant and land promised by the one true God. Wouldn't God's promises have strained the credulity and faith of even the most devout and faithful follower? Perhaps. And we should note as well that Sarai had been barren throughout her life. And yet, Avram had not taken another wife or a concubine, as was the practice of the day, because it was absolutely necessary to have an heir. And now, Sarai's body no longer kept the monthly cycle of women. Childbearing wasn't even a possibility. And Sarai herself testified that her husband was too old to father children. Yet in spite of this biological reality, God chose Avram and Sarai from among all the people on the earth, telling Avram that he would indeed have a son. The descendants of this son would outnumber the stars in the sky and the sand of the seas. These promises are at the very heart of God's covenant relationship with Avram and Sarai, the basis of all his other promises. What we read next is that Avram set out with his wife, Sarai, whose name God also changed to Sarah, which means princess. He took with him his nephew Lot and all their material possessions, including the souls they had acquired in Canaan, that is, all those who were part of their household. Before the promises made to Abraham could be realized, he had to leave his father's house and the security of what he knew and trusted. We're told that Abraham simply did as God commanded, exercising genuine emunah and bitachon, faith and trust in God's promises. When he and Sarah arrived in Canaan, God again appeared to him, telling him that this land to which he had journeyed would belong to his and Sarah's descendants forever. In response to God's astonishing promise, Torah states simply yet profoundly, because he put his trust in Adonai, God reckoned it to his credit. And we read in the book of Ivrim, it was accounted to him as righteousness. This is what righteousness looks like. Obedience. In that one rather amazing sentence, Torah contrasts the deep complexity of biblical faith, tested tried, and holding fast in all circumstances and in every situation. With the superficiality of contemporary thought, which suggests that faith may make extravagant demands upon God while expecting to do nothing. And so Abraham arrived in the land of promise, and he settled in Shechem, and then he moved southward. And a severe famine compelled him to go even further, from there to Egypt. Worried that the Egyptians would kill him and take his beautiful wife, Sarah, still beautiful in her 70s, Abram instructed her to say that she was his sister. This, of course, was only half a lie. And apparently the old wife as sister ploy temporarily worked. But ultimately it backfired because God directly intervened. Abraham was spared, but Sarah was taken for the pleasure of the Pharaoh. Abraham acquired animals and slaves in this deal for Sarah, but God afflicted the palace with an awful plague as a result. And Pharaoh discovered the lie through God's direct action. He sent Abraham and Sarah packing, teaching them a lesson, one would hope, which they did not learn all that well, about the power of Hashem to protect them. Is that a lesson that you have learned? Returning to the land of Canaan, a conflict developed. A conflict between Abraham's and Lot's herdsmen. Abraham wisely suggested that he and Lot go their separate ways, clearly indicated by the circumstances, but also no doubt this was God's plan as well, because Lot would have no holding in the future with Abraham. Abraham generously offered Lot first choice as to location, although the first choice should have gone to the elder rather than the younger. So this tells us something about Lot. Lot did not disagree. He took advantage of Abraham's graciousness and chose to settle in the well-watered plain of the Jordan, near the wicked Canaanite cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham remained in the hill country, and God continued to prosper him. Yet again, God appeared to Abraham, telling him to look in all directions at the land surrounding him. This is the land he had given Abraham's descendants, he reminds Abraham. After a time, an intertribal war broke out that we read about in our Torah reading, during which Lot and his family were taken captive. Lot seems to always have been something of a problem. When Avram learned of this, as tribal family leader and as a warrior, although he's not described in this way elsewhere, clearly he was. He gathered soldiers, he had over 300 men, and he pursued the captors, freeing Lot and his family. After the Battle of the Kings, we meet Melchizedek for the first and only time. His title is Melech of Righteousness. Melech of Righteousness. The King of Righteousness. And Cohen of the Most High God. As was proper, Abraham paid tithes to him, and he received a blessing as the lesser from the greater. Who would be greater than Avraham Avinu? An interesting question. This personage is not in view again until Tehillim 110, and only once after that in the book of Ivrim, where he is more thoroughly described as an early persona of Hashem, a theophany, an appearance, prior to the incarnation of God in the person of Mashiach Yeshua, linked also with rulership of Yerushalayim. Very interesting. And I want to note here that the Tehillim 110 passage, the Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies a footstool for thy feet. In the Talmud, it says that that Hashem, the eternal God, is speaking to Abraham. But that's impossible because Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. And it says of him later, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. How would that be possible if in fact he paid tithes to Melchizedek? Well, something to think about. In chapter 15, God again reassures Abraham, who is growing ever older, as we all do, that the land will indeed belong to his physical descendants, of which he as yet has none. Abraham did not complain, but he did note that he and Sarah were still childless, without a physical heir, and incidentally, Lot was never considered Abraham's heir. He states that fact here. As things stand at the moment, all of Abraham's property would probably have gone to his steward, Eliezer of Damascus, which it says. But God again promised Abraham that the offspring of his body will be as numerous as the stars. At God's command, Abraham sets up what was typical of in those days. He takes a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, and a 3-year-old ram, along with a turtle dove and a young bird. As instructed, he kills them, cuts them in half except for the bird, and separates the halves, placing them opposite one another. Abraham drove the birds of prey away from the carcasses, and then he fell into a deep sleep. And during this sleep, he is told that his offspring will be enslaved for 400 years. When night has fallen and the sky is completely dark, a smoking oven is described, and a flaming torch pass between the pieces of the animal carcasses. And God declares his unilateral covenant, usually both parties pass between these animals and make an agreement. But in this case, it's a unilateral covenant made by God with Abraham. Upon the life's blood of these animals, this was customary at the time, although it was usual, as I've said, for both parties to pass between the animals, and this would have been a bilateral agreement. Once again, God repeats his eternal, unbreakable, unilateral promises to Abraham and his descendants through Sarah forever. The saga of Sarah and Abraham and Hagar has been told and retold in many different ways, and with a different outcome if you choose to believe Muhammad, who lived more than 500 years after Yeshua and would have first heard this narrative from Jews living in tribes near him in Arabia. Abraham and Sarah were fearful and anxious. They attempted to solve a problem that did not exist except in their own minds. And the outcome of their machinations created even more complications than that with the Egyptian Pharaoh. Complications, of course, that are with us to this day. But God, who knew the end as well as the beginning, also knew and provided for this eventuality and for the child that was born to Hagar. Again, God repeated his covenant promises to Abraham, whose name he now formally changes, along with Sarah's. From this time onward, they will never be known by their previous names. What do we know about Abraham? Torah does not describe his childhood or his youth, although our Rabbanim have sometimes stepped in to fill in the missing years in their own inimitable way. According to one midrash, Abraham's father Terah was an idol merchant. We have no reason to believe this. The descendants of Shem, the righteous son of Noach, are known to be God-fearers. As the story goes, one day Terah left his son in charge of the shop, and Avram smashed all the idols except for the largest one, into whose hands, being a smart boy, he placed an axe. When Terah returned, Avram reported that the idols were hungry, so he'd brought them food. And he told his father that the largest idol had then grabbed the axe, killed all the other idols, and taken all the food for himself. Terah replied that this was nonsense, since everyone knows that the idols of clay and wood can't talk, move, or eat. And Avram then responded to Terah, "Father, let your ears hear what your tongue speaks." Torah actually tells us nothing about the spiritual life of Abraham and the family before his calling. The people of Ur and Haran were pagans who worshipped the ancient Babylonian pantheon of deities, in particular the moon god, Siri. Thus, it was by God's providence alone that Abraham and any members of his family knew the one true God and recognized his voice. Torah also tells us that when Abraham and Sarah left Haran, they took with them the souls they had acquired there. The Midrash asks, how can someone acquire or create souls? The answer is that for someone who brings another person to God, it is as if he or she has created a soul. We know that Abraham brought all of those of his household into the covenant with God through the act of male circumcision. And Avraham is called an Ivri, a Hebrew. Rashi translates the term as other, meaning that Avram came from the other side of the Euphrates River. The Midrash uses the same translation, but integrates it in a different way. The whole world stood on one side, and Avram, the Ivri, stood on the other. What qualities did Avram exhibit that set him apart from others? We know that he stood against the idolatry of the day as a worshiper of the one true God. Have you ever been in a position where you've been the only one who's taken a stand for God? Something that sets you apart from those around you, at work, school, in a social situation. As we look at Abraham and Sarah, what do we see? What kind of man was Abraham? What kind of woman was Sarah? What unique qualities made them God's choice as the father and mother of our people, of his people? In what ways were Abraham and Sarah role models for us to follow? Consider the journey of faith made by these two people. And now think about your own life. What journeys have you taken in your life? The most important journeys have nothing to do with travel. Where have your journeys led you? How have they changed and influenced the course of your life? What journeys are you looking forward to? What part does God play in these journeys? Do you trust God to take you wherever he wants you to go? Like Abraham and Sarah, each of us has baggage that we take with us. Material possessions, yes, but also character traits. These make us who and what we are. We take these wherever we go, and sometimes, as with Abraham and Sarah, these character traits get us into trouble. But imagine that you must leave your home, as our people have had to do so many times, as we fled from persecution and to freedom. If you had to leave home forever, what would you take with you? Think about what is precious to you. What do you have that is irreplaceable? If you were downsizing, what could you leave behind or give away? What in your life is irreplaceable? What would you cling to, no matter what the challenge? Perhaps not objects, but what really matters, like keeping Shabbat, clinging to Torah. God told Abraham he and his family would be a blessing to the entire world. What does that mean, to be a blessing? We are also called by Rav Yeshua the salt and the light of the world. To whom are you a blessing? What can you do to be a light to those around you? As God called Abraham and Sarah, so he calls each of us, Lekh, Lecha, go forth. This is a call to follow him wherever he may take us. And the sign of Abraham's covenant is male circumcision. At the time of Avram's circumcision, there was no anesthetic, and he was elderly. And it was at that time that his name was changed by God. What did this act of circumcision mean to Avraham? What does it mean to us today? Some people don't think it's either needed or that it's important. And yet it is the sign of the covenant into which God says they have come as children of Abraham by faith. By faith. That is what Abraham had. And it was accounted to him as righteousness. And the sign of that faith was male circumcision. Hashem changed Abraham's name and Sarah's name at the time of Avram's circumcision. So obviously, this was a momentous event in their lives. Sarah's name change, like her character, is as significant as that of Avraham. Her new name was a statement by God that she would be the mother of the great nation of which he had spoken to Avram, his nation. She was a partner with him in the covenant with God and had personal standing with God. Most significantly, she was told that she would have a child of her own, despite the unlikelihood of this. A name change, especially when that name is chosen by God, may be seen as a way in which the direction of one's life may be permanently altered. A person given a new name is on an altered but specific path. A new name defines that change of direction. Hashem changed Avram's name, and with it his destiny. Avram and Sarai would never have a child, and they would live out their lives with their family in Haran. Avraham and Sarah would indeed have a child with a God-ordained destiny, a purpose, and a land. Following the pattern of Avraham, it is appropriate to take a Hebrew name as part of the conversion experience. Entering the Avrahamic covenant relationship with God is an indication of new direction, a new purpose, following the God of Israel. After one has changed one's name with spiritual intent, one should be inspired to become the person that God has created him or her to be. This is part of the process of conversion, or making teshuvah, returning, declaring along with the name change that one is a new or renewed person, not the person he or she was before coming into the covenant or returning to the covenant, if one was born a Jew but did not live as a Jew. It is a statement of arrival on the path of full commitment to the ways and the commandments of Hashem. A new name is not a replacement for the name one already has. It truly becomes one's name, as if it was so originally. God gave both Avraham and Sarah their new names, after which they were never known by the names they had been given at birth. Names in Hebrew are important because they're filled with meaning and intent, unlike most English or European names. Here are a few examples. Avahu, God is my father. Amiel, God of my people. Amos, burdened, troubled. Yahashua, God is my salvation. Abigail, my father's joy. Leora, light is mine. Malka, queen. Ronia, joy of the Lord. Shoshona, lily. Ziva, splendor. If you have not yet processed all of this to the point of seeking to become part of this covenant and choosing a Hebrew name, consider this. Your Hebrew name can be a statement to God and to others of your spiritual intent. However, you should choose your Hebrew name carefully. This name will remain with you forever, used perpetually within Israel, your spiritual family. It will be used for every public event relating to birth, marriage, or family in the synagogue. It will be used at your funeral, written on your tombstone, used when Yitzchar is recited on the anniversary of your death, or when gifts are given in your honor or memory. My full Hebrew name is Ruth Shulamet Bat Rav Yaakov Gedalia Bamalka. Yitzhak's name was Yitzhak ben Avraham Vasera. Yeshua's name was Yeshua ben Yosef Miriam. Finally, consider Abraham and Sarah, our mother and father. With their new names, they finally and fully entered the covenant of faith as God intended. It is as Abraham and Sarah that we remember them. It is Abraham and Sarah by whose names many converts to Judaism are called to the reading of the scriptures. Abraham and Sarah are the mother and father of the covenant, heroes of faith, examples to us, role models, a testimony of the work of God in the lives of two very human, imperfect beings. In Pirkei Avot, the sayings of the fathers, we read that each person has three names. The first is the name chosen by our parents, over which we have no control. The second is the name by which others call us, which has to do with character, gifting, and attributes. The third is the one we choose or make for ourselves, or perhaps the one God chooses for us, so that we might be renewed in his covenant faith through Mashiach Yeshua, to walk with him in the days of our lives, as did our father and mother, Abraham and Sarah. I wish you a blessed week.